Hello, everyone. Welcome. We are so excited to be welcoming Ruchir Joshi here twice in 1 month at the DFF. If some of you were here 2-3 weeks ago, Ruchir Joshi was part of our lecture and film series on SATYAJIT RAY and gave a talk on the big city and Meghatakatara, how do you say the? Cloud-capped star. And now we have him for a completely different seminar that we are doing at the Goethe University, co-convened by Vincent Heidegger and me, Ritika Kaushik. The seminar is called India as Method, and it looks at the challenges and perspectives in studying Indian media and politics through the kind of new approaches that are coming up amongst media scholars and film scholars from the region and internationally. And we are so happy that Ruchir could join us and share his views as a film practitioner who has been working in India for a long time. Apart from being a filmmaker, he is also a columnist, a cultural writer, and has been making films from the 1990s. More recently, Arsenal's Film Archive restored 3 of his films: 11 Miles from 1991, Memories of Milk City, sketches for a film on Ahmedabad from 1991 also, and Tales from Planet Kolkata from 1993. And the last 2 we are screening today as part of the evening. And the first film we'll be showing, actually I'm not sure which one they'll show first, but Memories of Milk City is a cine poem that looks back at the city of Ahmedabad, which is the Indian state, Gujarat state capital. And it is located within India's milk region and catches it during a moment of transition. And Tales of Planet Kolkata deploys subversive humor to interrogate the cinematic representations of the city of Kolkata, where Ruchir is based and has been living for a really long time, and challenges the outsider images by directors such as Jean Renoir, Pier Paolo Pasolini, Louis Malle, and Roland Joffé. And both films are shot on 16mm and really reimagine the form of the essay film to propose new ways of looking at the multitudes of Indian life on screen. In more recent years, he has also been making video works like A Mercedes for Ashish from 2006, which is another portrait of a city in flux, and My Rio, My Tokyo from 2012, which examines the final period of the Communist Party of India, Marxist rule in Kolkata. And but we have Ruchir today in his capacity as a filmmaker, but like I said, he's also a prolific writer and a regular columnist for the Indian English language daily, The Telegraph. And apart from his experimental documentaries and films, he has also turned his attention to writing when he turned to journalism, and also wrote for The Hindu apart from The Telegraph. And his 2011 book, Poriborton, an election diary, emerges from this journalistic work and draws from his writings in advance of the state election in West Bengal that saw the change in governance. He is also renowned for his debut novel, The Last Jet Engine Laugh, which was marveled for its originality in prose. And he has a new novel coming up, hopefully next year, called The Great Eastern Hotel, which has been long awaited. And with that, Ruchir will say a few words just to welcome you, and then we'll have a longer talk with him after we screen the films. So please join me in welcoming Ruchir Joshi.
Hi, I'll keep this brief. Thank you for coming. Thank you, Vincent and Ritika, for the invitation, both the previous time and this time. Thank you, Bjorn and Pramila at the back and backstage for the wonderful projection last time and all your arrangements and everything. I'll give I'll talk for a while after the screenings are over, and then we hopefully will have time also for a question and answer session. Please have a good screening, and I'll speak to you soon again. Bye. So each time, I see these films, new thoughts and additions to old thoughts happen. let me maybe break it down into three segments. One is, if I could just give you the context in which these films were made. And for those of you who were here for the SATYAJIT RAY films, this is a continuation of that story, which starts with the end of the Second World War, partition, refugees coming, Calcutta exploding and expanding into this massive city, 5 times the size or 4 times the size it was before the war starts in 1939. And in that starts the film movement, which is, we now know, the serious cinema movement with Rai, with Ritik Ghatak, with Mrinal Sen, and with the fourth person who you don't know that much, Tapan Sinha, and many others. And I grow up, I'm born and I grow up in this Calcutta. And at some point in my teenage years, I decided I want to be a filmmaker. I go to America, I study visual arts, I come back. I assist a couple of serious filmmakers in Bombay, but I work on one film, and then I'd come back to Calcutta and decide to start working on my own film work. And it's difficult because the idea is eventually to make feature films and go to Cannes or Venice or Berlin and, have your films showing in Bleecker Street Cinema and in the cinemas in Paris and in Berlin and whatever. But, and there's whole kind of legendary, stuff that in our minds become legends, that people keep getting invited to Oberhausen, to Leipzig, and to Berlin, in Germany especially, Locarno, Venice, and the ambition is to make features. But then the stepping stone, the blocks are you still want to make cinema, you've got smaller subjects, you also want to make documentaries about things that have not been documented before. And in India, the documentary movement is very, very strange in the sense that it's unusual, it's different. And there is a government films division which is formed in the late 1930s, partly for war propaganda, etc., by the British Raj. And when they leave, the central government takes it over and they decide that this is a very important part of our mixed economy, which is part free economy, but part Sovietic in the sense we have 5-year plans, we have a lot of control from the nationalized, various important things are nationalized, and the films division starts making documentaries and films. For those of you who don't know this, some of you know this very well, so please forgive me for repeating things you know. And they start making films in the 50s and 60s, which are black and white, which are documentary, which also are the newsreels that they make, which is the only live news we see. There is no television. And we usually see these shots before the Bombay films or the Calcutta Bengali commercial films or whatever Hollywood films that are coming. There's a films division slot where you have to sit and see it. People would somehow go out for ice cream and stuff if it was boring, but sometimes they found it interesting as well. But those were the only documentaries we knew en masse in India. But slowly, some of the more interesting films division work, and in the 70s, filmmakers like Manikal and like Anand Patwardhan very differently politically, and various other people started to make serious documentary attempts, serious documentary cinema. Yugantar was formed in the early 80s. Shashi Anand makes a film about the rickshaw pullers of Calcutta, which wins the main prize at Oberhausen in, I think, 1980 or 81. And so we proceed. The main important thing about India, which I explained last time, was in Calcutta especially, is if you put a camera on a street, you will get a crowd of people trying to look into the lens at that point, because it is a fascinating circus. It's a new equipment. It's a new thing. What is this creature and what are you shooting? And always associated with some stars or some kind of Hollywood, Bombay or Tollygunge, which is Calcutta's film area, stars. So it was difficult to shoot a normal documentary as you would, kind of what you imagine here perhaps in the West. And the lighter, smaller your camera, the better off you were. But there were very, very few 16mm cameras and very, very few privately owned ones. And some of them were not in good shape. So again, a lot of the 16mm cameras were always employed in making feature films which people couldn't afford to make 35, so they would make it in 16 and then do blow up. So the best 16 cameras were always occupied by the feature filmmakers who were making, and you had to find the gaps in between. And it's in this context that me and a bunch of other people in Calcutta, a bunch of people in Bombay, Delhi, Bangalore start to make films in the 80s and late 80s, early 90s. Video is yet to come. So just to explain this, I've written about this in an article, so if you read that again, forgive me, I'm repeating. But the way it would work is you had no money. You gathered money from friends or your own money or whatever. There was no funding for films as such. Quite different from the situation in, say, Germany or in Europe. And you had to get film stock to shoot something. So the National Film Development Corporation had full control of the film stock, because such was the film industry in India that big producers would corner all the available Kodak or Fujicolor stock so that their competitors couldn't shoot during the dates they wanted to shoot. Right? Or they didn't want to run out of this, so they were putting stock away. So basically, the government instituted a whole system of permits. So you went to the National Film Development NFDC office and you applied for stock. And they said, oh, you're making a documentary. Oh, this is your first documentary. Okay, I will give you permission to buy 6 rolls of 16mm film or 10 rolls. It depended on the bureaucrat and how sweetly you talked to him. So you got that permission. So you got 10 rolls or 8 rolls. And they were precious because Kodak, then you went with that to the Kodak people. And Kodak people say, we don't really have the stock. It's been booked by somebody. You know, they got permission before you. They're making a feature film. And you said, look, but I've got this. I need to shoot now. There's an event happening. So again, you sweet talk the Kodak person. Calcutta didn't have much of a Fujicolor thing. Bombay did. So it was a monopoly. So you got your 8 rolls of stock from Kodak. You got a slightly beat up, dodgy camera from whoever rented it out to you. You got a Nagra tape recorder, and you went and started shooting your documentary, right? And you shot it with a bunch of people helping you, because the camera would come with an attendant and sometimes with 2 people, because they didn't trust the camera to be taken by just anyone. The Nagra would also come with an assistant. So a small documentary crew would be you, the cameraman, the sound recordist, plus 4 other assistants who you had to feed and take care of and tell them not to talk during a shot and that kind of stuff. So you then went and shot the stuff. Then you took the film, and at first there was no laboratory in Calcutta for 16mm. So you had to fly to Bombay or send the stock to Bombay to be processed. Then the stock would be processed. Then could you afford color rushes? Usually not. So you got rushes done on cheap, positive, the cheapest black and white stock you could find. And that's what you got back. And maybe half a reel you got in color just to see your colors were okay. Right? This stuff came back. Once it came back, the lab gave you a certificate that, yes, you have given 8 rolls of film to us, and we have processed 8 rolls of films. You took that certificate back to NFDC to get your next bunch of stock. Okay? So it was a very, very painful process of just actually organizing a film shoot. And in that, you had people who really didn't understand what you were doing. Why are you making this? Why aren't you making a feature film? Do you have any actors? What's your story? Oh, you're making a documentary. Have you got the script all done? No. I'm making it up as I go along. How can you do that? That's not allowed. Are you crazy? It's so expensive. And it's true, it was crazy. So again, these films were kind of made in that context. But just to put this stuff in place, the main struggle that I faced as a filmmaker was for the film that came before these 2 films, which is called 11 Miles, which is on traditional folk singers in Bengal. They're called the Baul singers, the Bauls. And that film took 3.5 years to make, and there was no money at first. Then some money came in. Then I got finishing funds from Alan Fountain at Channel 4. And then that film was done. And that met with some success. It got an award at Cinema du Real, and it was received well and made the rounds of the festivals in India, etc. So therefore, there was some recognition. and the next films were easier. And in the meantime, Fountain and Channel 4 started this whole initiative called South, which was to give South filmmakers a voice in British television. So it was actually formalized, this whole thing. It was short-lived, but while it was there, I benefited from it. So both these films are co-productions with South Productions in London. So Memories of Milk City had an okay budget for a short film, and we did all right with it. And Tales actually, I have to confess, had a really good budget for a 16mm film. For example, if I wanted to, and I did, keep a crane on some days where, I didn't know what I wanted to do with it, but I wanted a crane, the crane would be there on whichever location I wanted. And a crane was a massive old feature film crane with 8 people coming, again, attendants, and you fed them and they sat around and you woke them up suddenly and said, okay, now we need to take a shot. They got up, they did the shot. So it's a very different film from the documentaries that I'm describing. Before 11 Miles, the other problem was that there was also, on the one hand, there was the government which believed that documentaries had to be about the glory of India and cultural stuff and just saying good things about. And then there was a kind of left mafia, Stalinist left mafia, who had no time for formal exploration or experimentation or essay films of any sort. They wanted, the argument and, this has to be about the workers' struggle, this has to be about the women's struggle, this has to be against the missile testing range, this has to be about against the dam being put up, this has to be about extrajudicial killings or killings in police custody. All good, necessary things, but for them it was the only thing that had to be done in counter to the commercial cinema and as an alternative to the serious fiction cinema. And so we really, some of us who wanted to make different kinds of cinema actually fell in between the stools, as they say in English, and we were like neither here nor there. But we managed somehow to make our work. And I have to say that in my case, there were these 3 films. And then after this, the Tales from Planet Kolkata was finished in 1993. And the first portable, really affordable video camera started to arrive in 1995. So then suddenly you got a spate of people making personal diary films because they could keep the camera and they could shoot whenever they wanted and edit at home. And it changed completely from the mid-90s. So these films are again a kind of liminal period where they were very straight, or except for a couple of people like Money Call, and I think one film by Kumar Shani, which probably came later actually. But nobody really in India was making essay film, experimental documentary, or whatever you want to call it, till the late 90s, where this and Saudamini and a couple of other people, we made the films we did. And then right after that, the video came, so the 16mm thing stopped and it became a whole different ballgame. So that's the context in which these films were made. Now, the second thing I'd like to talk about is, and this kind of gets joined up, is about archival stuff, memories, preservation, and the thoughts that occurred to me about that. I mean, so basically, I don't know how to put this, but when I look at these films, I spoke at the previous talk of Mahanagar and Meghe Dhaka Tara, which were made in 1960 and 1963, time kind of pushing those 2 films together, even though they were made by rival filmmakers and they were made 3 years apart and they're very different in a lot of people's minds. Now we can see the overlaps and the similarities. Similarly, in a much more modest way, these 2 films for me, in my mind, were very different when I made them. But now they kind of get squeezed together by time. I made them within the space of 2 years. And they're really, after these 3 films that I made, 11 Miles and these 2, I never quite managed to do this kind of work again. I never worked on film again, I haven't yet. And I thought I'd move to fiction, I didn't. And the video work I did was varied. There was a mainstream film on cricket, there were some other films, all video, and then there were the essay films that came later. But these were one-offs in that sense. So what happens there is that Calcutta, for example, is a city where, and I wonder if this is a function of colonialism, that part of what colonialism does is when I come to Berlin or London or Paris and Basel, I see something really well preserved, or not Basel so much as Swiss, but I'm saying places with colonial histories, and something of the colony, whether it's the India Office papers or whether it's the slides of the miniatures that were taken away and kept in the V&A Museum or the British Museum, and or what we see in all the huge storehouses of colonial artifacts and things in Paris. I'm at one level resentful, but another level I'm grateful that they are here, so they are preserved. But what happens in Calcutta, for example, is it's the city with possibly the richest architectural heritage. It starts in 1793 when the British basically take over Bengal and start trying to capture India from Calcutta. And so while Madras is there as a small port and fortress, and Baroda, Surat is there, Bombay is coming up. Calcutta is the center of the universe as far as India is concerned. So a huge number of interesting buildings, parks, museums, all kinds of things happen in Calcutta. And it's also the worst preserved city in terms of its heritage in India. Among the worst, probably the worst. Why is that? Because right after independence, the people who are trying to deal with stuff, they're dealing with crisis to crisis to crisis. By the time the left front comes to power in 1977, these guys are at one level progressive. They want to redistribute land, they want to uplift the poor, but culturally they are vandals. They have no sense that colonial history needs to be preserved precisely in an anti-colonial, so that there can be an understanding of an anti-coloniality, or how to understand coloniality and therefore make sure. They just see it as not important. And so from 1977, for the first 20 years of their rule, we get these ugly Stalinist blocks, some of which you are familiar with here as well in East Germany, but not as well built as the ones in East Germany. They're badly built, badly designed, ugly blocks which start rotting in the rain within a few years. And that, along with the old mansions and the old buildings and the parks and everything, that becomes Calcutta. People live in that. Alongside that, that's this whole idea of preserving a film heritage also doesn't exist. So, again, other people who made very interesting, to my mind, some very important films in the 1980s and 90s, a lot of those films are gone. They're not the 16mm films. They have vaporized. They've turned into vinegar or dust or fungus or whatever. They're gone. These films survived because all three of them were finished in London. And I had the sense that I couldn't afford a lab to pay money to a lab in India to keep the films. And I knew air conditioning was erratic. So I managed to keep the films in London, in attics or whatever, and first in laboratories, but as the 16 laboratories shut down, they were in an attic. And then, thanks to Harun Farooqi and Arsenal, etc., we managed to bring them here and preserve them. But films that were made at the same time by other people are gone. There are video copies, there are bad DVD copies. You will not be able to get the 16mm films. So again, I wonder, because I think it's also something that colonialism leaves behind, where it's actually the inability to think of preserving. Now there is an awareness. But in the 70s and 80s, there was no sense that, oh my God, we are losing an important heritage and we need to work to preserve it. That sense was very rare and in very, very small pockets, really, right? So, I mean, so these are the kind of thoughts that come to my mind when I see these films, that, oh, these two are survivors. I got lucky. I also made sure, I deserved my luck in the sense that I was always very anal and meticulous about protecting my stuff. Other people were not. Compared to films, I think photographs and written material has done better in terms of archives in Calcutta, because Calcutta had many libraries. It produced many writers, lots of books in Bengali, lots of books in English, all these things. A lot of them are gone, but many are preserved, and some are there for us to still consult today. But the thought was at that point that today was always bullying the yesterday, and therefore was also knocking the tomorrow of the coming generations off the road with the crisis and with short-term thinking and panic and an obsession with a certain kind of hack leftist politics and a certain kind of hack leftist cultural politics. And we suffered from that. Having said that, I'll move on to the next thing, which is, I think this applies to all works of art probably, but I think it applies more to film and especially more to non-fiction film. Which is when I see this stuff, I feel that on the one hand, as time passes, especially with documentary and essay films, the filmmaker, she or he loses ownership of the work while still retaining contextual responsibility for it. So you're still responsible for what you did, the choices you made, what you didn't do. But it's no longer so much your film as it becomes a film that is taken over by that time, right? Just to give you an example, I mean, I don't know how familiar all of you are with Indian politics, but when I see Memories of Milk City, which is, you know, the idea was a poetic, elliptical sketch of a poetic film almost of my parents' hometown, the hometown where the language from which I come, though I live in Calcutta, which is a Bengali, primarily a Bengali city, both my parents were Gujarati, I am a Gujarati. Now, to put that in context, famous Gujaratis you have heard of, Mahatma Gandhi is one. Sardar Patel, who was the first Home Minister of India, secular, very strong, who unites India, Vallabh Patel, he was another. But today, two of the worst people living on this planet, namely Narendra Modi and his sidekick Amit Shah, they are also both Gujaratis, right? So this is my misfortune, because my father was a Gujarati writer of some note, my mother was a professor. I grew up in a culture of Gujarat which had to do with poetry, which had to do with Gandhism, an idea of freedom, an idea of equality, all this stuff. And it's all being dismantled and bulldozered at a rapid pace as we speak. But what happens post-independence in India is that the RSS, which is based itself on Hitler and Mussolini and the SS, which is a Hindu militant organization, they become very active in Gujarat, right? And in Gujarat, across the 80s, where the rest of the country sees some problems between Hindus and Muslims, Gujarat sees a lot of riots, a lot of killings, a lot of trouble. And Memories of Milk City is made at the end of that decade of the 80s. It's made in 1991, where some of these riots and stuff are still fresh, which is why I got this really well-known Gujarati writer who was a friend of my parents and my friend as well, I guess, Madhu Rai, who had written a nonsense verse about Hindu-Muslim riots in 1969. I got him to read that out. And then he also reads out a text that he writes about Ahmedabad changing and everybody having some relative in America, etc. What I don't understand at this point is that this rise of the Hindu right and this whole business of liberalization, people going to America, India opening up to the world in terms of, industries coming in and, consumer culture coming in a big way, which happens in 91, that they're going to be intimately connected and kind of power each other in a strange way, right? So this film is at that nodal point where that happens. One of the things that Modi does when he comes to power 10 years ago is cow slaughter suddenly becomes this kind of thing where, Hindus don't eat beef and the people who slaughter cows are Muslims, and anyone who's caught with cows, and there's this huge cow export, beef export industries in India. We send beef to the Middle East, we send beef to Bangladesh, all that is ignored. Basically, it becomes like a business where the Hindu right wing takes over the cow slaughtering and cow export business while killing the people who may be innocent of cow slaughter. It's a weird, nasty thing that happens. But when you see the cows here, which is just normal cows walking around in Ahmedabad, right? And the first shot is of a massive cow shelter, which is right in the middle of the biggest Muslim concentration in the old city. So those cows coming out with the azan going on is of that place. But in 2002, the Hindu right wing unleashes a whole pogrom against the Muslims using the attack on a railway carriage of Hindu militants as a kind of excuse, like a Kristallnacht kind of thing. Classic model. And suddenly for the next 2 months, there is slaughter in Gujarat, right? And that is 10, 11 years after this film is made. But the cows, the whole consumer culture that's there, those boys in the middle, who is the only people who actually talk in the film. I mean, there's a funny crisscross of what's going on there. They are on the one hand making sort of gay, queer jokes, like, I like you, he says to me, or I like him, and waiting to see my reaction as to what would be. And at the same time, he says, you can't get pussy in this town, right? At the same time, they seamlessly talk about politics. That this guy is BJP, which is the Hindu right-wing party. No, this guy is Congress. And that whole talk and chit-chat, these are the kind of people who were either participating in the anti-Muslim riots or were completely indifferent to it, but other people did it. There's a microcosm there, which was not, I could not have imagined it or understood it at that point. But now I do. I mean, in the sense the film preserves that for me to think about now. But it has got nothing to do with my skill or my perspicacity or anything like that, right? Similarly with Calcutta, the whole thing of, when I make the film, Calcutta is seen as the end of the world, the worst place in the world. You've had books written about it. You've had Louis Malle come and make Phantom de l'Inde, but at the same time a separate film on Calcutta because he loves Calcutta so much, but also it's so rich in material for him. Then other people have come through and done films around Calcutta. And then finally, Joffé uses it as a backdrop for his big Hollywood production, which is when, which I've got stuff from. But right after that, the darkest city of the world moves somewhere else. It goes to Lagos, or it goes to Mexico City, or it goes somewhere else. Calcutta loses that distinction as well of being the worst city in the world. We become absolutely forgettable and mediocre for the next 20 years. And the whole idea of this, irrepressible vitality, which is one argument I'm making for Bengali culture or for Calcutta through Pasolini's poem, that also goes. Now Calcutta is a very different, mutated place, and it's got its consumer culture, its petty fascism against the bigger fascism of Modi in Delhi. However, the Hindu right is also now making inroads unimaginable at the time of this film. So things have again changed. So when you look at this Tales from Planet Kolkata now, it's again like a time capsule piece for me. And everything, the process, whatever we were planning to do, the attempts we made, the equipment, the challenges, all these things go into looking at these films, but also when you pull back and you see it as a nugget of that whole time as well. I can go on, but I think it'd be maybe more interesting for now if I could take some questions and we could get into even a discussion of some sort. Hello. Yeah.
Thank you so much for laying it out for us like that, because I think if it was up to me, the first question I would have asked you is exactly where do you see your work in relation to in the ecology of like documentary films history in India, right? And I'm so glad that you gave us a little bit to chew on from like pre-independence to post-independence, to kind of the 80s and 90s moment in India, which I think would have been very helpful for our audience today, because the history of Indian documentary in India is so peculiar compared to the West, where the circulation of films was never really free market, right? It was always state-controlled. It was imposed on people, so people had to go and sit through these films in theaters. So where like the new kind of movement in documentary starts to emerge outside of the state, one of the things is also that they find alternative modes of screening the films.
Yes.
Because one of the kind of ways in which people were used to experiencing documentary films was in these state-mandated screenings before the feature film. So I thought that was like a very interesting kind of segue into why certain kinds of films were made and why the issue-based documentary had such currency in India, against the backdrop of which I think your work stands, and so kind of importantly for us. And given that's the case, could you also speak a little bit more and give us a little bit more to like think about in terms of the aesthetics of your practice, which, I mean, you've already mentioned so many things that are like, you know, the poetics, the elliptical kind of structure, but also the satire or the humor that I think is like so central, and which to me seems to be so something that like people wouldn't necessarily fund, is also because documentary's association with humor is so, you know, in India it's like very fraught, right?
It isn't there.
It's like, yeah.
You don't laugh in a documentary. You know?
Exactly. So it's like you're supposed to experience it this very serious way, and your films really challenge the viewer to get out of that mode of viewing films and, you know, thinking through it like in such a different way. So I was wondering like what's your relationship with like this kind of humor, or, you know.
Well, my lineage, if you like, is that my father was not only a really well-known writer, but he was a very passionate and very talented, I think, photographer and painter. And so I learned early with him, and there were books in the house. You know, there was The Family of Man, there was Henri Cartier-Bresson, Life magazine with photographs in it. So, I mean, me and a couple of other friends that I knew were taking pictures from a very early age, from our teens and all this. And then when I went to America, I went to study film, but the film department had shut down in this college in Vermont. So I ended up studying photography and painting and doing a visual arts degree. So there, the whole thing that I was already familiar with, whether it's pop art, abstract expressionism, Western painting, sculpture, photography, you suddenly got, you know, whatever, Cindy Sherman, you got all the kind of, you know, Robert Heineken, all the postmodern crazy kind of stuff that was going on in the late 70s. And at the same time, you got Robert Frank in America, you got the 35mm lens and a certain kind of use of the wide-angle lens. For me, initially a certain kind of hesitation about the telephoto, but then actually slapping myself and saying, just because other people don't like telephoto, why wouldn't you use it? And so therefore more in actually 11 Miles, which we haven't seen today. But there was also a certain kind of aesthetic which developed with the telephoto, that you're not treating it like safari shooting or keeping a distance from poor people or from events and shooting, but actually using it to make a certain different point kind of thing. So all these things come into play, and also contrapuntal use of sound, and using sound that is not necessarily natural to the scenario at that point. For example, again, I'm referring to a film that we haven't seen, but you know, in 11 Miles, which is about folk musicians, you get Miles Davis, you get Laurie Anderson, you get references to Iggy Pop. You know, in these films, it's more with Tales from Planet Kolkata. I mean, there is a conscious effort to mimic certain kinds of filmmaking. For example, in the old building, the shots of the ceiling and all are a kind of homage to the music room, Jalsagor, Satyajit Ray. The railing, the dark railings and stuff is a kind of nod to the passenger, you know, at some level. The rail track which goes just before the title and stops. If you see a film by Ritwik Ghatak called Komal Gandhar, there is a iconic, I mean, I use this word advisedly, misused a lot nowadays, but basically this couple goes to the newly formed border between East Pakistan and West Bengal, which is the two Bengals are sundered. And they actually walk down this rail line towards a river. and then there is this block that has been put across the rail line, and there's a river, and that rail line would normally have gone across the river, but it's just been chopped off. And that, as a sense of sundering and longing, has been long seen as a great poetic shot. So that was a salute. The track shot of the actual camera track shot was a kind of a homage to Hrithik. And there's many other small things like that. Godard is in there all the time for me. You cannot escape Godard. When I made 11 Miles, I hadn't seen Chris Marker. By the time I made Tales, I had seen Sans Soleil. I'd seen La Jetée, of course, earlier, but Sans Soleil I saw. And so there would be an influence of that as well, to a certain degree. I mean, all of this. So those were the kind of aesthetics. In the Ahmedabad film, I'm looking at Indian miniatures. I'm looking at the kind of wall paintings and miniature cow paintings and the flattening of stuff that you get in Rajasthani paintings in Gujarat, etc. So that is at the back of my mind when I'm working with that film, right? So, I mean, there's more, but I'll stop there.
Yeah, I wonder if our audience have any questions. I don't want to hog the mic here. But as people think, maybe one small question I was also wondering about is, you mentioned like both your kind of community of filmmakers who you were thinking with or making films with.
Or fighting with.
Or fighting with, I'm sure. And if, I don't know if the word collaboration is right, but what was the kind of, because the cinematographer Ranjan Palit is like in your films, who's also made a lot of films, including films by Anand Patwardhan and his own films, in like more than 100 documentaries that he has worked on. So these are like people who have different lives in very different aesthetic forms of filmmaking as well. Reena Mohan, I think, edited the first film, and she's also a filmmaker, worked on like...
She's done both these
films.
She's
both, okay. And her work with Kamla Bai, I think, right?
This
and
is hers,
like more performance-oriented. So these are like, very different aesthetic forms that people are working with, and kind of both adjacent or parallel to documentary film. But what was your relationship with this community of people, and what impact did that have on your film?
I could write a book on that. No, I told jokes last time, so I think I'll start with a joke right now. And I know not all of you are football fans, but I know at least one person is, so I'll say the joke at least for him. So when we were editing 11 Miles, again, sorry to bring that film back up again, Mahadev Shi, my editor, and I, the 1990 World Cup was going on at this point. And in India, we know that we are hopeless because in our lifetime, at least, I don't know, I could be surprised. Many things have happened. But at that point, we knew that India was never going to play World Cup football, hadn't ever. And, so, I mean, some of us were supporting Brazil, some of us supporting Germany. In Calcutta breaks up into camps, different neighborhoods support different countries, and there's fighting, actually. I mean, these are Bengali football fans, because Calcutta is the biggest football city in the country. The rest of it is cricket. Calcutta is also cricket, but we're crazy about football. And so one neighborhood will be Germany, another one will be Argentina, somebody will be England, and this kind of craziness happens. And then they have wall paintings and murals, and it's a different thing. And in that time, we were editing 11 Miles, and there's the Italians had two strikers, Vialli and Schillaci. And so we decided at some point that all the bad cuts, if I didn't like a cut or he didn't like a cut, he'd say Vialli. And if we got a really good cut, we'd say Schillaci. And then towards the end, as Germany began to progress, and frankly, we didn't like Germany because they're very robotic and very machine-like to us at that point. Now I have a different view. And suddenly it was like, that's a Klinsmann. So it was like, that's how we were working through this. Now, if I'd said anything like this in Reena Mohan's editing room, she would have slapped me because she's not interested in football. So, okay, so the thing is, all these people that I worked with came from the Film Institute in Pune, Film and Television Institute, FTII. And so Ranjan Palit, camera, Reena Mohan, editing, Samira Jain, who I've never worked with, but friends with, editing and direction. Mahadev Shi, editing. Suresh Rajamani, sound. A.M. Padmanabhan Paddy, who we sadly lost this year, who mixed all the three films here, passed away all too early, but he was in bad health. Again, FTII. So Vikram Joglekar, FTII also. I mean, there's others. But so Calcutta, there was Ranjan Palit, there was his wife and partner Vasudha Joshi, both close friends of mine, Mahadev Shi, and some other people who were working in documentaries there. But we were also close to people in Delhi, people like Sanjay Kak, Pankaj Bhutalia, Samira Jain, Reena Mohan. They were all from Pune, but Delhi-based. Reena and Samira would travel between Bombay and Delhi. And then there was always the Bombay contingent of people, filmmakers there. And the Bombay contingent tended more to focus towards, except for Anand, of course, who's always been a documentary person. Others were more focused towards a little bit, and then it changed also towards feature films and all that. So the documentary centers at that point were Delhi, Calcutta, more than Bombay. Though Bombay, of course, then came up with some really great films as well. So, and there's always this dynamic between people who'd been to film school and not. So I said, oh, you people have been to film school. Okay, let me teach you how to make a film. And then that kind of, oh, you don't know anything, Ruchir, you don't even know which way a camera points. I mean, this would go on for, but that was part of the process. So Ranjan, for example, shot my films, and he shot his and Vasudha's films. He made his own films later with video. He shot Anand's films. He's also shot Amar Kanwar. He shot Sanjay Kak. Very, very different kinds of film work. But I like to think that between us in those 3 years that we worked, we really developed some camera stuff that he found very useful later as well. So that's one thing I would put out there, yeah.
Yeah, I just have a comment. For me, it was interesting to see how the bricks are used again, as reused. And we see this ecologically smart-minded way of behavior at this time, and in poor countries, of course. Whereas, as you just pointed out, in the 90s, we have the move towards capitalism destruction, not creative destruction, but destruction. And this is somehow, I mean, something, you see it happening, but not too much, really. You just see the supermarkets, and you see not, oh, okay, in the first film, you just see the starting supermarkets and so on, and not paved streets yet. And that is something I think the two films capture quite well. I mean,
and you see the ruins in old Ahmedabad of the stairways and a broken down building, which is an old 19th century building.
But the stuff used again, it wouldn't be done anymore.
No.
And that's part of the problem, of course. And that's what I like about the film somehow. It brings us back. That's also a time capsule, right? I mean, it doesn't happen anymore. And so, yes, Calcutta maybe has become as mediocre as Germany and all these capitalistic countries.
Yeah, except the recycling industry has grown in Calcutta, and the crazy stuff. I just saw a not very good film, but fascinating subject of people collecting television sets and electronics all over and going to a suburb of Calcutta where they are refashioning like the mountains of this stuff, quite toxic, but they're using it and working on it. And it's something, again, that you don't see very much. You wouldn't not see it in the first world, and you wouldn't even see it in other parts of India so much as you see it in Bengal. Brazil, possibly, yes. Yeah. Africa, you would see it, I think.
Hello. I have maybe a bit of a strange question. Where can we see the other essay films that you made later?
Two of them are on the net, aren't they? Mercedes and... See, I know that My Rio, My Tokyo is available on the net, and I can try and find it and let Ritika know. Mercedes for Ashish, I'm not sure. They were both again funded by PSBT, which was a documentary funding.
Then it should be on YouTube.
Organization. They don't put up all their stuff, but they should be. And it'll be the PSBT versions and not my versions, but that's all right. You could see those there.
Thank you. And I have a question. You said about that poem in the first movie.
Yeah.
You already, I mean, you said that you were acquainted with the poet and you knew this poem before you made the movie.
Yeah.
But was it like a clear association, something that really...
For
like
me, it wasn't the main theme of the film. It was like one of the themes that, okay, while people are eating all this stuff and while people are going to America and while this kind of new stuff is clashing with this old city, this Hindu-Muslim thing is also going on and needs to be kind of, I need to index towards it in some way. So that's why the poem was an idea. But again, I asked him to do a separate text, and those two texts kind of clash with each other across the voiceover, actually. So the poem is in italics and the voiceover is non-italicized. And that's the only other voice except for the first, my nephew reading out the menu and not getting the decimal point.
100 rupees.
600 rupees for an ice cream, which is a lot, by the way. Not Japan or lire in Italy, old Italy. But yeah, so it's that.
Thank you.
Could you also share something about your working with Tony Coates in the film Tales of Planet Kolkata,
Sure,
and how
absolutely.
that came out to be?
Yeah. So I go to America in 1979. I'm 19 years old. You're not supposed to go to America to study stuff at this point because American colleges don't give scholarships to undergraduates. And somehow I find this college called Goddard College, with nothing to do with Jean-Luc Godard. This is John Goddard, who was a scientist and who started an alternative education thing in Vermont, in a halfway point between Barrie and Montpelier, if any of you know Vermont. And very beautiful campus, very beautiful area, and completely prefab little dorm houses and stuff. And then another campus which had beautiful wooden, hippie type, but solid architecture there. So they offered me a scholarship. I got there. Like I said, I was going there for the film program. The film program had shut down. But they had a very, very interesting photography department run by a man called Jeff Weiss, and it's called Sea Basement, which was in this basement. So the whole thing was, it was a sea basement, was a cult. And then there was an art school with an old art building, a hippie-made wooden crazy art building. Tony was finishing his graduate work, BA graduate work. His last semester was my first semester. And we became friends. He was 23, I was 19. And we just hit it off and then stayed in touch and then got closer and closer. So he's like one of my best friends. Across the 80s, he was starting to do his work, his kind of stuff. Again, very peripheral, very marginal, not getting much traction in the galleries, but insistent on doing what he wanted to do and really making classic, which are now regarded as classics, things like Black Celebration and Fade to Black, these two early videos of his using rock music and contemporary music with archival footage and text, that kind of stuff, right? And I was obviously fully supportive of him and loved his work, and we kept in touch. He was supportive of my work. And in 1989, he decided to make a film about his mother, which was earlier called Love, Labor, Language, but then he changed the name to The Book of Love. And his mother was a worker, sort of catering in charge in a hospital, and she had brought up all her children by herself as a single mother in Richmond, Virginia, in a house behind the Marlboro factory. And Tony had come out of this background and then got to where he'd got to as a teacher and artist. And he's very close to his mother. And I had, you know, so I went and met her with him and I helped him with that film. I did the camera on it. Another friend did the sound and he interviewed her and she talked and sang and stuff. And it's a great, again, it's showing at MoMA recently. The Book of Love is a great film, video, actually. So he'd worked on that with me. And then I got the funding for 11 Miles. So he actually came down to India during the shooting of 11 Miles just like that. And then when I got the funding for this, I said, let's work on something together. And I was working on the script with Shamal Sengupta's. A lot of the text is mine. I mean, all my text that I speak is mine. But I said, why don't you write a text for this? And, you know, this is the theme, this is the idea. So he then came up with the text that he speaks out. And then I had this idea that what would it be like if it was a rickshaw? And he was very uncomfortable with it at first. He was like, yeah, fuck, man, I don't know. But then I'll give it a shot. And he went through with it. And I think it's a very powerful moment what happens there. But it was tough. I mean, at the same time, Babri Masjid had just been broken down. And all these upheavals were going on in the country while we were making this film. And then Deepak Majumdar, this man was my teacher and friend, I looked up to him. He dies during this period. So it's all happening at that point. But then that's where the association with Tony comes from. And then, of course, now Tony is highly recognized, one of the most important video artists coming out of America, all over Germany in the last 2, 3, 4 years. The 2 shows in Munich, he was there at the Berlinale, the Berlin Biennale, etc., etc. So that was, you know, what I loved about him is that he doesn't change. He was like, yeah, I'm doing my stuff. They recognize it now, great. You know, something to learn.
Any final questions from our audience? Bjorn, how are we doing for time? Few more minutes? Yeah, okay.
Yeah, let's.
Excellent.
We can be nice, you know, because you feeling okay?
Thank you. The films were introduced as one being a poem film or film poem and the other one the essay film. And obviously, given how important both your own writing, your own literary work, but also the different literary sources that you use for the films and, of course, the kind of great association between Bengali culture and all of the reference that you talked about, I wonder how you think about, do you think now of these films as a poem film, as an essay film? Do these terms mean something to you, or is it just something that seems like a fitting but maybe kind of more of a, I don't know, standard reference, as like whether that's...
I was talking to somebody yesterday. They were trying to ask me about my novel, and they said, how would you define it? How would you define? I said, I don't know how I would define it. It's a historical novel set in Calcutta in the Second World War, but it's not this, it's not this, it's not this. So the guy turned around to me and said, oh, it's a publicist's nightmare then. And I said, yeah, I would say that. And we were talking about how a lot of work, novels in this case, are like fitted novels, like they're sort of stitched to fit a certain slot of readership, or how you can describe something, and how we were all desperate to see more and more of unfitted artwork, if you like. So I think some of the interesting things is like when I first made the films, how I described them, and then I would lose that description because if I didn't have it on my computer, I lost that file, I'd make it up again. So yeah, they both have strong essayistic elements and they both have strong poetic elements. What I feel greedy about is this idea of a sketch for a film, which allows me a certain kind of untidiness and sketchiness, which I would like to use again in something, you know. But that's just a concept thing. I think the Memories of Milk City is poetic because it's more concise in form and less prose-based in terms of, you know, people talking or me laying something on it. There is that one voiceover and the rest is poetry, and the pictures also move in a kind of poetic way and rhythmically. Tales from Planet Kolkata has moments of what I think is poetic takeoffs, and then it comes back to earth with a fairly grounded argument and then takes off again. And of course, there's Dukho Sham in there, who's a traditional folk painter, and I tell him the argument of the film, and he writes it down, and he turns it into his poetry. And the imagery is also, I give him some of the imageries of say a city of joy being shot or this or that, and he does it, he translates that into his visual language. So there's a different layer of poetry happening over there. I also think Tony's spoken text is very, very poetic. So there's that poetry, there's Tagore's poetry in terms of the song at the end, there's Pasolini at the end poetry. So I mean, it moves, oscillates between poetry and prose and essay, and it's that kind of a poetic essay attempt at, I would say.
It's also like layered, right? Sometimes, yeah, you speak and then we hear the... But we have another question there.
First of all, thank you. And my question is referring to a detail in the first film. There is one sequence where it's like filmed from a swing, where you are looking towards a window. Yeah. And I was just wondering, as I'm not very knowledgeable and learning a lot of things about Indian film, there's also, in Charulata, there's also this scene. And so I was wondering if you had this in mind also, or
well, yes, and yes. But what one has to understand is that in Gujarat there is a whole swing culture, which means that each house, instead of having a sofa set, will actually have a sofa set sized swing, either in the porch, sometimes more than one. You would actually have, in a really big house, 3 or 4. So your porch would have a swing, your inner room would have a swing, what was like your living room would have a swing, and the patriarch of the house would sit on a swing and make all the decisions. The matriarch of the house would have her own swing sometimes and do her prayer singing from there. And if it was a limited house, there would just be maybe one swing, or one swing on one floor, another swing on another floor. So if you know Gujarat at all, or if you don't know Gujarat, people who would know Gujarat would get that. And that sound that you get, the chink, 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 is a classic sound of a Gujarati household, right? So this is something, you don't get the swing in Rajasthan so much, so you do in South Rajasthan a bit, and Maharashtra, I think, and South India maybe, but Gujarat is a very strong urban Gujarat, not just urban, village Gujarat as well. So the swing is there. So of course I was very aware of the Charulata shot, and I had not till that point seen Cleo 5 to 7, where there's a kind of, she does Varda, another kind of swing over the piano, when that woman is, the main character is singing. So these are two beautiful swinging shots. One is directly related to a swing, which is Charulata. The other is just poetic use of a swinging camera. Of course, I'd seen Charulata, so we were laughing about it like this is Charulata. But the thing is, it's two kids fighting, and they're two cousins who are snatching the gun from each other. And there's a cow out there and everything. So, yeah. So that was the idea with that shot.
I wanted to circle back to what Masha had asked, and hearing you answer that question about the, like the kind of pleasure in not fitting a certain category, but it being a publicist's nightmare.
Yeah.
It makes me think of like in the contemporary documentary scene, if you think about the festival circuit and its impact on the style of films.
Mm-hmm.
And there's a way in which Indian films have been, in the last couple of years, won the best prizes in the best festivals, right? There is a series of, there's a surge of Indian films making their mark.
Yeah.
On the other hand, the mark that they're making is also somewhat related to the funding institutes that are in, France or like Netherlands, or, So there's a way in which like the production money is coming from the West, and then Indian filmmakers are making these films, like, but they have to also like speak to the demands of the festival aesthetics, and depending on where they choose to screen their films. And I feel like the power of these films, and also the importance of them, watching them today, because they're both like prescient in this way that people familiar with Indian politics, or who, like you gave us the context, of all that's in the film, we can really see like how prescient they are today, just by the, what they have captured. But people have not seen them because they didn't, get this kind of circulation. So all these new filmmakers that are coming, there's a complete divergence, or maybe a little bit of divergence from these past forms of essayistic modes. I feel like there is a more move towards the story-based film.
Yeah, I think it's a bit of a nightmare. I don't mean to put down anyone's films, but really, Calcutta is the one place, the Satyajit Ray Film Institute, which hosts this thing called, what is it called? Doc Fest or Doc...
Doc Edge.
Doc Edge, oh my God, yeah. So I wasn't invited to it because, I didn't fit, and I was anyway too old. This was all for young people, whatever. And I went there a few times, and there was this whole thing about pitching to Western commissioning editors, Japanese and American, European commissioning editors. And there were these star commissioning editors, one guy from Japan, one guy from Finland, one guy from America, one guy from, maybe Al Jazeera or something. Mm-hmm. And they had different tastes, and they were moody, and you were basically catering to them. How can we massage this guy or this woman? And they were people who are mentoring you. I hate this word now in this context. Who are mentoring you to change your pitch. I mean, how to sell, not what you were doing, but how to sell what you were doing. And there are people who are they're working with you to tailor your trailer or your show reel to be able to sell to partners and how to do it. So, I mean, basically it's a homogenization. It's like, you know, McDonald's taking a bunch of meat and just scrunching it together so it fits a patty. It's that, it really is that kind of feeling. And I'm like, how do you get anything original out of it? It's all got to be compelling. It's all got to be, the narrative has to be gripping, and it all has to be character-based. And these buzzwords, you know, and they started when basically Alan Fountain was kicked out of his job. And my joke is that because he funded people like me, but it's true as well. No, he lasted a good 10, 12 years. I think he funded a lot of German films, a lot of South American films. But when this new regime came in the mid-90s into Channel 4, which basically what happens is that Channel 4 is a child of the Labour government of the 70s. But when Callahan goes, he has set this in motion, so Thatcher can't stop it, and the countercultural alternative channel takes place, and it lasts through the 80s. And by the time Blair comes, Thatcher and Major have killed it, so it changes character even before Blair comes. So by the time it's late Major years. And suddenly it's got to be commercial. Suddenly they're showing sumo wrestling and American football. And Alan was like a crazy guy as a commissioning editor. I mean, I landed up in London with Mahadev, and we'd shown a rough cut to one of his assistant commissioning editors. And he met us for lunch, and he said, so how long is the film, guys? So we said it's about 2.5 hours long. And he says, oh, okay. And Mahadev says, well, nothing much happens for the first 90 minutes, but then it picks up. And I'm like holding my face saying, Mahadev, what are you saying to the commissioning editor? Nothing much happens in the first 90 minutes. But Alan is not unfazed. He says, yeah, that's fine. I'm showing a German film, which is for 4.5 hours. It's fine. So, I mean, it was that kind of craziness, right? And only the Germans could be crazier than what we were doing, I suppose. But that was short. I mean, 1994, 95. Yeah, he's out of a job by 1995. So, and then it's impossible to get work in British television of that kind of work. Right? And you, again, the whole story becomes like, if you're going to make a film about prostitution in Thailand, it has to be two white men going to get laid in Thailand, and you have to follow them and through them tell the stories of the sex workers that you meet. You can't actually do it any other way. And so and again it becomes about the BBC boys who are laid off from BBC getting jobs from their friends who are still commissioning editors. So filmmakers of other parts of the world who have other ways of saying things are sidelined yet again after a little window of thing. So, I mean, this is all, and the people who do different kind of films go into the art world then. So if you see someone like Amar Kanwar's work, or if you see something, various other people as well, they move away from mainstream television channels into the gallery space or into an installation space, stuff like that, right? And I'm not saying all the new films are terrible or bad or anything. I think Payal Kapadi is a great filmmaker, for example. I haven't seen the feature, but I saw the A Night of Knowing Nothing. Night of Knowing. That, I liked that a lot. There's other people as well. But, you know, I mean, yeah, I mean, I can go on about...
No. Thank you for that. I wanted to provoke you into saying exactly that.
I'm too easily provoked. That should be more discreet.
Final thoughts from our guests? Here, take this.
Yeah, this would be the opening for another 5-hour discussion, but it's interesting to look at the German situation by comparison, the role of television, and actually, Channel 4 was built with input from a guy called Eckhard Stein, who was the editor of commissioning editor of ein kleines Fernsehspiel, and a pioneering figure in. Actually world cinema, because
I have an Eckhart Stein story.
Oh, okay.
But you go ahead first.
So that format has proven to be more resilient than Channel 4, because recently, last year, there was a big exhibition curated by Alexandra Schneider and Mark Siegel on the history, on the 60th anniversary of the Kleines Fernsehspiel, and they continue to do that kind of work in Mainz, actually. And they keep on playing that role. But a similar story is when Harun Farocki, like when Werner Deutsch, the commissioning editor of Westdeutscher Rundfunk, was approaching retirement age, Harun became an artist. Basically, he transitioned into the art world, learning the code, and learning how to position himself in the art world. He was very successful doing it, as we know. But that was, and he openly spoke about it. It was like a conscious choice because he didn't know who would follow Werner Deutsch, who commissioned all his films from the 1980s onward. And actually, sure enough, the guy who succeeded him wouldn't have commissioned any work from Harun Farocki. So. But those are really interesting stories, and you tell us the Eckhart Stein story.
Yeah, no,
or maybe at some later point.
Harun was a far smarter guy than me, I think, which is not difficult to be smarter than me, but he was incredibly intelligent man. No, I'm living in his house at the moment, so his wife Anche was putting away papers, and there was actually a letter from, I don't think it was Werner Deutsch, or somebody else from ZDF in the mid-70s, early 80s, saying, yes, I like the project and we will work towards it, but I warn you, we will need partners and they may not be as open to your ideas as I am, and that's just a word of warning to you, etc. And, you know, signed. So he had his struggles with the commissioning as well, but I think he managed across a long period from the 70s, 80s, 60s, 70s, 80s, 90s. I finished these films and Alan Fountain was on his way out, and I can't remember the names of these two women who were part of ZDF, Das Kleine Fernsehspiel, but one of them saw these films at a festival and said, do you have any ideas? And I said, can I pitch an idea to you? Because I did have an idea for a very film like 11 Miles, but a long feature-length documentary, essay, road movie called Drinking in India, looking at different drinking cultures in India. And this would have been a big project. It should have, and that was my next thing. And this project got back and forth. It went between 1994, 95, till 96 actually. And it made it almost to the final point when the table at Das Kleine Fernsehspiel was divided half and half, and Eckhart Stein had the casting vote. And he then said, oh no, Ruchir Joshi can get money from British television, etc. We don't have to give him the money. I think we can say no. And there were two women pushing for this, for commissioning, and they both were angry enough to say to him, you call and tell him, because we think it should be done. We think it's a brilliant idea. Now, had he said yes, I think my life might have taken a very different trajectory. I might have stayed on in the film world and may continue to do different kinds of film work. But what happens to me after Fountain leaves and ZDF says no is that there is nothing in India and it's completely barren, and the art stuff is yet to start, and I have to survive. I have two kids to protect, to bring up, and I'd moved into doing writing anyway, and I decided, I was working on a novel, and suddenly the novel got some money in advance and support. So I shifted boats in midstream and became a fiction writer. And then the films were much rarer in between. I hope to change that now after this film, after this book gets done, to go back to filmmaking. But there was that whole period of about 20, 25 years where, I rarely made, I made 3 or 4 films total, you know. And I think I have Eckhart Stein. I can't blame him, but had he done it differently, who knows?
That's such a wonderful note for me, especially because one of the characters, when they say in the film, who were at the City of Joy shoot, and you ask them, like, I think it's you who asked them about, like, but did you see your city in the film? Yeah, and they say no. And I think one of the future things that I would personally like to see is, like, how do you see Kolkata today? You know, and because is this city that you see yours, you know, or what would it look like?
Yeah, well, I mean, there's a piece I wrote for Granta, which is called Traces. I'll send you the PDF of that. That's photographs and text, which is one kind of way of looking at Calcutta during the COVID times and just after. But yeah, I'd love to get back to doing something with film and see what happens. Yeah.
Looking forward to that very much.
Yes, thank you.
Thank you so much, Ruchir, for
Thank you,
joining
everyone.
us today.
Thank you for coming and for staying for the Q&A, etc. Thank you.